Hi, I'm Andy and welcome to a Watch Crave video. Today, we will be having a look at the Steeldive SD1953. The watch itself is a heavy homage of the ever-popular Submariner. It's also a pretty old Steeldive release that has been around for a few years now. As a guy with small wrists, I bought this watch for one main reason, to see if I can find another Submariner homage that will fit my tiny 6.2-inch wrist. It also helps that the watch is rather affordable, and I was impressed by Steeldive's other release, the SD1970 Captain Willard Homage. This particular watch here is offered in a few variations. There's black, blue, green/Hulk, green and black/Starbucks, and light blue. These can be bought with either a rubber strap, oyster bracelet, or Jubilee bracelet. For this video, I actually have two watches, a Starbucks on an oyster bracelet and a green Hulk on a Jubilee. I bought both these watches from the same store, albeit at different times. I got the Starbucks first and then the Hulk a few months later. Despite being the same model, I was surprised to find a couple of small differences between the two watches, which I will talk about later in the video. And if you're wondering why I bought two watches, I will explain that later as well. When it comes to the price, this watch can be bought normally for around $80 to $99 US. However, you can get it for as low as $50 to $60 US during a good sale. If you are interested in getting your hands on one, I recommend getting it during a sales. As usual with a lot of homage brands from AliExpress, the packaging is pretty simple. There's a Pelican case, guarantee card, user manual, and bracelet resizing tools. Nothing fancy, but it does the job. Onto the specs and measurements. The watch diameter measures at 41 mm. It is 13.5 mm thick, not the thinnest of divers, but it should still fit under a shirt's cuff. The lug width measures at 20 mm. The lug-to-lug distance is 48 mm. However, the watch bracelet used male end links, so we do have a bit of extra length. Including the male end links, the total length equal to 52 mm. Sadly, the Jubilee bracelet also used male end links, and the total length is 52.5 mm. For the glass, the watch sports a box sapphire crystal with clear AR coating. There's a Cyclops with 2.5x magnification at the 3 o'clock position. The water resistant rating is rated at 300 meters. As with most AliExpress watches, you should take this rating with a grain of salt. However, I've read on forums that many have had success with taking this watch underwater without any issue. With a few links removed to fit my 6.2-inch wrist, the oyster bracelet watch weighs in at 161 grams, whereas the Jubilee is 152 grams. Finally, it's running with the Seiko NH35 movement. The NH35 is an automatic movement that beats at 21,600 beats per hour. The movement supports hacking and hand winding and has a date wheel. It has a power reserve of 41 hours and the out-of-the-box accuracy rating is plus 40 seconds to minus 20 seconds per day. I don't know if Steeldive regulates their movement or not, but the Starbucks is running at plus 13 seconds per day and the Hulk is minus 3 seconds. Considering the NH35 has an out-of-the-box rating at plus 40 and minus 20 seconds per day, I would say those accuracy readings are acceptable. As this watch is a Submariner homage, the case spots a design very similar, if not identical to the very popular Submariner. The case is brush finish on top and polished on the sides. The finishing is fairly simple, and the quality isn't the best. It doesn't have the same shines and luster as the more expensive brands like St. Martin. However, it's acceptable for this price range. The back of the case is also brush finish, and we have a screw-down case back decorated with a huge Steeldive logo along with some text. One good thing I like to point out is that the edges are not sharp. The lug tips are a bit pointy, but they are not sharp either. This is a good thing, as it makes the watch quite comfortable to wear. Moving on to the crown, we have a screw-down crown signed with the Steeldive logo. The crown is protected by these lug guards, which are also brush finish. The crown itself is fairly smooth and easy to grip. Once unscrewed, the winding action is quite smooth. Unfortunately, the same can't be said for the grittiness when unscrewing and screwing the crown back in. This is the first instant where there's a small difference between the two watches. The gritty feeling on the Hulk version isn't too bad, but the one on the Starbucks is quite terrible. to the point where it's rather unpleasant. I would say this is a QC issue and has to do with the lug guards not sanded down enough. It's not a deal breaker, but something to be aware of if you're planning to get this watch. Next up is the bezel. We have a 120 clicks unidirectional rotating bezel. The finishing on the bezel is not too bad and is consistent with the case finishing. While it is easy to grip, the tip of the bezel's teeth can be a bit sharp. Now when it comes to the bezel's action, this is another instant where there's a stark difference between the two watches. The bezel actions on the Starbucks is fairly smooth and responsive. There's also not much backplay. However, the feedback from the spring feels a bit cheap, and the sound is rather high-pitched. The bezel action on the Hulk, on the other hand, is a bit tighter and less responsive. It feels like it's sliding instead of clicking. However, the feedback and sound are a bit better. It's quite interesting. These two watches are supposed to be the same, but the bezel action feels completely different. On a positive note, the bezel insert is made of ceramic and the markers are fully lumed with BGW9. On both watches, the bezel inserts are well aligned. Let's move from the bezel to the bracelet. For the Starbucks, we have an oyster style bracelet. The bracelet is brush finish on top and bottom and polished on the flanks. The finishing is not too bad and is consistent with the case. The bracelet starts at 20mm and taper down to 18mm. The links, including the end links, are solid and the edges are fairly smooth. However, they are held together with pins and the connection between the links are fairly loose, making the bracelet feels ratchety. Still, it's a rather decent bracelet if you consider the low price of the watch. Next is the Jubilee bracelet. For what I'm assuming to be a cost-cutting measure, it spots male end links. I've seen older pictures of the Jubilee bracelet with female end links, however, it seems they have recently switched to the male end links, at least for this watch anyway. For the top side, the two edge links are brush finish and the three in the middle are polished. Similar to the oyster bracelet, the bottom is brush finish and the sides are polished. The bracelet also starts at 20mm and taper down to 18mm. The links are solid, fairly smooth, and held together by pins. Now this is rather subjective, but I reckon the Jubilee bracelet looks underfinished when compared to the oyster bracelet. I guess since the Jubilee links are a bit more complicated than the oyster links, it requires a bit more effort to polish. If you are interested in getting this watch on a bracelet, I recommend the oyster bracelet over the Jubilee. Both bracelets are connected to the same clasp. It is a push-pin operated milk clasp with a safety latch. The clasp is well finished, brushed on top and polished on the sides. The top of the clasp is also decorated with the Steeldive logo and the Steeldive text on the safety latch. There are a whopping 6 micro adjustment slots, so there should be no issue getting the perfect fit. One minus point I have to give is the clasp operation. While closing is rather easy, the opening action is a bit of a pain. The safety latch sometimes will not budge. I need to push on the pins to slightly raise the clasp first. I recently reviewed another Steeldive watch that uses the same clasp, and that watch did not have this issue. I don't know how common this issue is, but at least it's present on both watches. Onto the dial, we have a simple flat dial with apply hour markers, along with a printed chapter ring around the edge. The markers are well polished and looks to be applied uniformly. On the Green Hulk, the dial has a slight sunburst effect. Below the 12 o'clock marker, we have a printed Steeldive logo. Above the 6 o'clock, we have the automatic and water rating text. Finally, we have a date window at the 3 o'clock position. For the hands, we have our usual Mercedes hands for the hours and minute, and a lollipop hand for the second. The hands are also well finished, however, they look a bit flat and lack depth when compared to more expensive submariner homages. On a more positive note, the indices and hands are filled with BGW9 Lume. The Lume color on the dial matches with that of the bezel inserts, making this a fully Lume watch. The Lume is very bright and lasts for quite a while. It's on par with the more expensive watches, quite impressive for such an affordable watch. In terms of fitting, on my small 6.2 inch wrist, the Starbucks looks a little too big for my small wrist due to the flare from the male end links. I reckon I can still pull it off, but it would definitely look better if the male end links curved down a bit more. As for the Jubilee bracelet, it definitely looks too big for my wrist. I guess 0.5mm does make a big difference. I'm actually disappointed as I bought the Jubilee bracelet thinking that it comes with female end links. At the very least, the watch is fairly comfortable to wear on either bracelet. I've worn both for more than a day without any issues. So, what is my verdict for this watch? The biggest thing going for this watch is of course the price. At under $100, there are only a couple of other options that can compete with this watch. The watch is decently finished and has decent bezel action. It also sports the timeless submariner design, a reliable NH35 movement, and full lume on the dial and bezel. And despite the watch being a bit too big for my wrist, it's quite comfortable to wear. In terms of cons, there are definitely a few. However, I would say these are more like improvements rather than cons. There's a lower quality finishing on the case and bracelet, the finicky clasps, and the flat hands on the dial. All of this kind of makes sense, since some corners will have to be cut to achieve the low price. Despite these cons, I still think the watch provides great value at its price tag and punches well above its weight if you can get it during a sales. If you are planning on getting it, I recommend staying away from the Jubilee bracelet and go for the Oyster bracelet or the rubber strap. And that brings us to the end of this video. What do you think about this watch? Would you get it? Or did you already got your hands on one? And how did you like or dislike it? Feel free to drop a comment down below. If you find this video enjoyable or helpful, please drop a like and subscribe for future videos. As a new channel, I really appreciate your support. Until next time.